So I'm going to be a little bit critical of German bosses right now. When I was younger, you would often hear about foreigners, for example, Americans or Turkish managers and so on, really rave about German managers, about their counterparts. So when German managers of the car industry, for example, they were in the United States or they were negotiating with Turkish people, they would be impressed by how well-educated German leaders are, how knowledgeable they are, how good at business they are. And I'm sorry to say that, being one of them now, in that I don't think that's true anymore. I don't think anybody is generally impressed by the quality of German leaders anymore. Of course, we have good leaders and we have worse leaders, but the average quality of the leader is not as good as it used to be. And that's partially because the other countries just have gotten better, but also we're getting worse. And if I'm asking myself why this is, I think there's a couple of reasons. So the first one is, frankly, I don't think we work hard enough. And yes, of course, a lot of leaders work a lot more hours than 40 hours, but a lot of them also only work like 45, 48 hours, and that's not enough if people in other countries are working 80, 90 hours. Because even if they are less competent in these other countries, if they just put in many more hours, they're going to learn over these hours, right? And they're going to make the progress. And I think this is actually what's happening with a lot of leaders in Asia. Their training might not be as good as the German leaders, but they're working many more hours. So they're at the cutting edge. They're learning stuff. They're doing stuff. And so, of course, over time, they're just going to get better. And the other thing is, I think we're wasting too much stuff in Germany and most of Europe with nonsense stuff. So privacy protection comes to mind, like all the legal bureaucratic stuff, all the nonsense that we constantly get thrown at by the bureaucracy. And by that, I don't mean that privacy protection isn't important. I actually am a big fan of that. But the way we're doing it is so overcomplicated and so overbearing, even in the most useless cases, that it binds the capacity of our leadership and of our organizations. So instead of a manager actually, or a leader actually working 80 hours and spending 60 hours on actual leadership, on product stuff, on sales, on meeting customers and so on, what they'll actually do is they'll work 48 hours and then spend 8 hours actually doing this kind of stuff and 40 hours being in nonsensical meetings and trainings about everything but the real business. And listen to me, I'm not saying this is not important and should be stopped completely. What I'm saying is, if we spend most of our time on this nonsensical stuff, of course everybody else is going to take the cake. What do you think is going to happen if a Chinese manager works 80, 90 hours and he spends most of the time in productive activities, whereas the German one works almost half the hours, but then spends 90% of that time in some kind of bureaucratic hellhole? Of course the Chinese manager is going to get better. And as German managers, we have to fight back against this. Yes, we will have to make sure that all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed, but we need to actually kind of aggressively make sure that we're focusing on the stuff that we're actually supposed to do, talking to customers, developing products, leading the organization, and actually making advances so that we can become more competitive again.